The rain hammered against the chapel windows like accusations from heaven itself. Only 3 people sat in the pews that should have been filled with mourners for my son, Jonathan. 3 people. For a man who claimed to have friends everywhere, who boasted about his successful business connections, who promised me grandchildren would fill my golden years with laughter. My name is Evelyn Brooks. I'm 65 years old, and I live in Portland, Oregon. Today, I buried my firstborn son, and the silence in that chapel was more deafening than any scream. Jonathan was 42 when the heart attack took him, sudden as a lightning strike, cruel as winter. I had sacrificed everything for that boy, $180,000 from my retirement fund to help him start his consulting business, countless sleepless nights worrying about his choices, and 20 years of being the grandmother who never got to hold a grandchild. The pastor's words echoed hollow in the empty space. Jonathan Brooks was beloved by many, he said, but where were they? Where were these mysterious friends? Where were his business partners? Where were the colleagues who supposedly respected him so much? Only Claire, my daughter-in-law of 8 years, sat 3 rows behind me, her black dress pristine, her face unreadable as stone. I had always tried to love Claire, though she made it difficult. She was beautiful in that cold, calculated way, sharp cheekbones, perfectly styled blonde hair, eyes like chips of blue ice. When Jonathan brought her home 8 years ago, I welcomed her with open arms, desperate for the daughter I never had. I even gave them $50,000 as a wedding gift, money I had saved for decades, dreaming of spoiling future grandchildren. But Claire remained distant, polite, but never warm. Every family gathering felt like a performance where she played the role of dutiful daughter-in-law while keeping me at arm's length. When I asked about grandchildren, she would smile that practiced smile and change the subject. When I offered to help with anything, she would decline with surgical precision. The funeral director cleared his throat, signaling the end. As I stood to say my final goodbye to Jonathan, my legs trembled like autumn leaves in a storm. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. This wasn't the funeral of a man who had lived a full life, surrounded by love. This was the burial of broken dreams and unanswered questions. The casket was beautiful, mahogany with brass handles, exactly what Jonathan would have wanted. I had paid $15,000 for it. Money I didn't really have, but he was my son. Even in death, he deserved the best I could give him. I approached slowly, each step heavier than the last, and placed my hand on the polished wood. "My beautiful boy," I whispered, my voice cracking like old pottery. "I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you. I'm so sorry you felt so alone." The tears came then, hot and bitter, 20 years of worry and disappointment and love pouring out of me like a broken dam. I had failed him somehow. I must have. Good sons don't die alone with only their mothers and wives to mourn them. Good sons don't leave behind such profound silence. That's when I felt Claire approach. Her heels clicked against the floor like a countdown timer. I expected comfort, perhaps the first genuine embrace we'd ever shared in our grief. Instead, she leaned close to my ear, her breath cold against my skin. "Do you want to know the truth?" she whispered. I froze. The words hit me like ice water, and something in her tone, something sharp and almost cruel, made my blood run cold. "What truth?" I asked, my voice trembling like a frightened child's. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope, yellowed at the edges, thick with whatever secrets it contained. She pressed it into my shaking hands, with the same emotion she might show handing over grocery money. "Everything you need to know is in there," she said, her voice flat as a gravestone. "Everything about Jonathan, about our marriage, about why no one came today." Then she walked away, her heels echoing in the empty chapel like gunshots, leaving me standing there with an envelope that felt heavier than my son's casket. If you're watching this story and feeling that chill of anticipation, that need to know what terrible truth Claire revealed, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. I promise you, what I discovered in that envelope will shock you as much as it devastated me. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love connecting with viewers around the world who understand that family secrets can be the most dangerous truths of all. My hands shook so violently I could barely hold the envelope as I sat in my car outside the funeral home. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained the color of old bruises, matching the ache in my chest. For several minutes, I just stared at the manila envelope, trying to summon the courage to open what felt like Pandora's box. The envelope was addressed to me in Jonathan's handwriting, that familiar scrawl I'd known since his childhood homework assignments. "For Mom, if something happens to me," it read. The date was from 3 months ago. 3 months ago, my son had written me a letter and given it to his wife, knowing somehow that death was coming for him. With trembling fingers, I tore open the seal. Inside were several pages of Jonathan's handwriting, bank statements, and what looked like legal documents. I began to read, and with each word, my world crumbled a little more. "Dear Mom," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then Claire has finally decided to give you the truth. I'm writing this because I can't carry these secrets anymore, and I can't bear the thought of you mourning a son who never existed." My breath caught. What did he mean? A son who never existed? "Mom, I have been living a lie for the past 8 years. Claire and I, we were never really married, not in the way you think. Our wedding was a performance, an elaborate deception designed to fool you and secure access to our family's money." The words blurred as tears fell onto the page. Our family's money? What family money? We were comfortable but hardly wealthy. I had given them everything I could, my retirement savings, my wedding gift money, countless smaller amounts over the years when Jonathan claimed business was slow. "The truth is, Mom, Claire is a professional con artist. She targets lonely older women through their adult children. She researched our family, learned about Dad's life insurance policy that you received after he died, about the money you inherited from Grandma Ruth, about your pension from 30 years of teaching. She knew you had approximately $400,000 in various accounts and investments." $400,000. He was right. Between my late husband's life insurance, my modest inheritance, my teacher's pension, and my savings, I had managed to accumulate that much over a lifetime of careful planning. Money I had intended to leave to Jonathan and any children he might have. Claire approached me at a coffee shop 2 years before we met at Sarah's party. "Do you remember how I told you it was love at first sight? It was all planned, Mom. She seduced me, convinced me that you were old-fashioned and wouldn't understand our modern relationship, and suggested we have a traditional wedding to make you happy." I remembered that wedding, the beautiful ceremony at the Rose Garden, the $30,000 I had contributed for what I thought was my son's happiness, the way Claire had insisted on handling all the financial arrangements, claiming it was too stressful for Jonathan with his business demands. The business, Mom, that was part of the con too. There never was a consulting business. The office you visited was rented by the day. The clients I talked about were fictional. Every time I asked you for money to expand the business or cover cash flow issues, it went straight into Claire's accounts. She has stolen over $200,000 from you through me. $200,000. 20 years of retirement savings, gone. I felt physically sick, my stomach churning like a washing machine. But there was more. I know you're wondering why I went along with this. Mom, she had videos of me. Compromising videos from before I knew who she really was. She threatened to destroy my reputation, to make sure I could never get legitimate work anywhere. She had me trapped in a web of lies and blackmail. The page was stained with what looked like tears, Jonathan's tears, from 3 months ago when he wrote this confession. But worse than the money, Mom, is what she made me do to you. Every cold interaction, every time I seemed distant at family gatherings, every time I canceled plans or forgot your birthday, that was her. She coached me on how to gradually distance myself from you, how to make you feel like you were losing me naturally so you'd try harder to buy my affection with more money. I remembered those times, the growing distance between us, the way Jonathan seemed to change after his marriage. I had blamed myself, wondered what I had done wrong, tried desperately to reconnect by being more generous, more giving, more accommodating. She wanted me to convince you to sell the house and move to a retirement community, claiming it would be safer for you. The plan was to have you gift us the proceeds, another $350,000, as an early inheritance for tax purposes. That's when I knew I had to stop this. The house, my beloved home where I had raised Jonathan, where his father and I had built our life together. Claire had been subtly suggesting for months that I might be happier in a senior living facility, that the house was too much for me to maintain alone. 3 months ago, I told Claire I was done. I was going to confess everything to you and face the consequences. That's when she showed me the life insurance policy she had taken out on me. $500,000 with her as the beneficiary. She said I was worth more to her dead than alive, and that if I tried to expose her, I might have an accident. My blood turned to ice water. Claire had threatened my son's life, and now he was dead from a sudden heart attack at 42, with no history of heart problems. Mom, I don't know if I'll die of natural causes or if Claire will make good on her threat. But if something happens to me, please know that I never stopped loving you. Every lie I told, every hurtful thing I did, was done with a gun to my head. Claire destroyed my life, but I won't let her destroy yours too. The letter continued for 2 more devastating pages, but I had to stop reading. My heart was pounding so hard I feared I might join Jonathan in whatever came next. Claire hadn't just stolen my money. She had murdered my relationship with my son, and possibly murdered my son himself. I sat in that funeral home parking lot for an hour, reading and rereading Jonathan's confession, trying to process the magnitude of the betrayal. Every conversation with Claire over the past 8 years took on a sinister new meaning. Every family dinner where she seemed to catalog my possessions with those calculating blue eyes. Every casual question about my finances that I had mistaken for concern. The worst part was realizing that Jonathan had been trapped, blackmailed, into hurting me. All those times I had cried myself to sleep, wondering why my loving son had become so cold, why he seemed to care more about money than our relationship. He had been protecting me the only way he knew how, trying to limit the damage while living under Claire's threats. But now he was dead, and Claire was about to collect a $500,000 life insurance payout on top of everything she had already stolen from our family. I picked up my phone with shaking hands and called Detective Martinez, a friend from my teaching days whose daughter had been in my 3rd grade class 20 years ago. Maria had always told me to call if I ever needed help, never imagining it would be for something like this. Mrs. Brooks. Maria's voice was warm with sympathy. I'm so sorry about Jonathan. How are you holding up? Maria, I need your help. I think my son was murdered. The silence stretched for several heartbeats. Mrs. Brooks, I know grief can make us. He left me a letter, Maria. Evidence. My daughter-in-law has been running a con for 8 years, and she threatened to kill him when he tried to expose her. I'm coming to you. Where are you? 20 minutes later, Maria sat in her unmarked police car reading Jonathan's letter while I provided context she needed. She was a small woman with graying hair and kind eyes, but I could see the cop in her as she processed the information. This is serious, Mrs. Brooks. If even half of this is true, we're looking at multiple felonies: fraud, elder abuse, extortion, and possibly murder. But I have to ask, do you have any of these bank statements or documents Jonathan mentions? I pulled out the additional papers from the envelope. Bank statements showing transfers from my accounts to accounts in Jonathan's name, which according to his letter, Claire controlled. Copies of the life insurance policy she had taken out on him. Even a photograph of Claire with a different name and hair color, standing next to an elderly man who looked devastated. Jonathan hired a private investigator 3 months ago, I explained, my voice stronger now that I was taking action. According to this, Claire's real name is Christina Vale, and I'm not her first victim. She's done this at least 3 times before. The man in this photo is Harold Weinstein from Sacramento. She married his son David and stole $300,000 from Harold before David died in a car accident. Maria's expression grew darker. Mrs. Brooks, I need to take this evidence to my captain immediately, but I want you to be very careful. If Claire suspects you know the truth, you could be in danger. What should I do? Act normal. If she contacts you, don't let on that you know anything. Don't confront her. Don't change your routine dramatically. We need time to investigate and build a case. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone buzzed with a text message from Claire. Evelyn, I hope you're doing okay after today. I know Jonathan would want us to support each other through this difficult time. Would you like to have dinner tomorrow to discuss the funeral arrangements and other matters we need to handle together? Other matters, like convincing me to liquidate my assets for an early inheritance. I showed the message to Maria, who nodded grimly. Perfect. Tell her yes, but suggest meeting at a public restaurant. I'll have officers nearby. My fingers trembled as I typed back, that would be nice, Claire. How about Giuseppe's on Hawthorne at 6 p.m.? I've always felt comfortable there. Her response came immediately. Perfect. I have some important papers from Jonathan's lawyer that we need to discuss. See you tomorrow. Papers from Jonathan's lawyer. More lies, more manipulation, more attempts to separate me from my life savings. But this time, I would be ready for her. That night, I lay in the bed I had shared with my husband for 30 years, staring at the ceiling and trying to reconcile the Claire I thought I knew with the monster Jonathan had described. Tomorrow, I would sit across from my son's murderer and pretend to be the grieving, confused old woman she expected me to be. But I wasn't that woman anymore. Jonathan's letter had awakened something fierce in me, something that had been sleeping since my husband died 5 years ago. Claire had stolen my money, corrupted my son, and destroyed my family. Now she would learn that this 65-year-old retired teacher still had some fight left in her. Giuseppe's restaurant hummed with the comfortable noise of families sharing meals, completely unaware that a predator sat among them. Claire arrived precisely on time, looking every inch the grieving widow in her elegant black dress and pearl necklace, pearls I now realized had probably been bought with my money. She embraced me with what felt like genuine warmth, the performance so convincing that for a moment I almost doubted Jonathan's letter. "Evelyn, you look exhausted," she said, her voice honeyed with false concern. "Have you been eating? Sleeping? I worry about you in that big house all alone." The big house. Already she was circling back to her ultimate prize. "I'm managing," I replied, settling into my chair across from her. Detective Martinez had coached me on appearing vulnerable but not suspicious. Some days are harder than others. I keep expecting Jonathan to call. Claire's eyes softened in what looked like genuine sympathy, and I marveled at her acting ability. "I know exactly what you mean. I found myself setting 2 plates for dinner last night before remembering—" She dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, and I wondered if those tears were real or practiced. According to Jonathan's letter, she had perfected this grieving widow routine at least 3 times before. "I brought those papers I mentioned," she said, pulling out a manila folder from her purse. "Jonathan's lawyer, well, our lawyer, Mr. Patterson, wanted me to go over these with you. There are some decisions we need to make quickly." Mr. Patterson, another name I didn't recognize, though Claire spoke of him as if I should know him well. I accepted the papers with trembling hands, playing the part of the overwhelmed widow, relying on her daughter-in-law's guidance. The first document made my blood run cold, though I kept my expression neutral. It was a will, supposedly Jonathan's, leaving everything to Claire and requesting that I liquidate my assets to ensure Claire's financial security in her grief. The signature looked authentic, but according to the letter, Claire had been forging Jonathan's signature for years. "This doesn't look like the will Jonathan showed me 2 years ago," I said carefully, remembering Detective Martinez's advice to probe without accusing. "Oh, he updated it 6 months ago," Claire said smoothly. "He was worried about your financial security as you age, and he thought it would be better if I managed the combined assets. You know how complicated money management can become as we get older." There it was, the subtle implication that I was becoming incompetent, the gentle nudge toward dependency. I thought of Harold Weinstein in the photograph, the devastated look in his eyes as he realized too late what had happened to his son and his fortune. "I'm not sure I understand," I said, playing confused. "Why would Jonathan want me to sell everything? This house has been in our family for 30 years. Claire leaned forward, her hand covering mine, in what appeared to be a comforting gesture. "Evelyn, I think Jonathan was concerned about your safety. You're 65 years old, living alone in a house that's too big for you. What if you fell? What if something happened and no one found you for days?" Her fingers were cold against my skin, and I resisted the urge to pull away. This was exactly what Jonathan had warned me about, the systematic dismantling of my independence, disguised as loving concern. "The retirement community we looked at, Sunset Manor, has an immediate opening," she continued. "The entry fee is only $200,000, and your monthly expenses would be so much lower. You could live comfortably for the rest of your life without financial worries." Sunset Manor. I had never looked at any retirement community with Claire, but she spoke as if we had toured it together. The lie came so naturally to her that I almost believed my own memory was faulty. "You mentioned our lawyer," I said, changing tactics. "I don't remember meeting Mr. Patterson." For just a moment, something flickered across Claire's face. Irritation, perhaps, or calculation. But the mask snapped back into place so quickly I might have imagined it. "Oh, you met him briefly at the wedding, but he's been so busy with Jonathan's business affairs. He's actually waiting for us to call him tonight to discuss the next steps." The wedding. 8 years ago, when I was so happy to see Jonathan settled that I hadn't questioned why none of the vendors would accept payment directly from me, why everything had to go through Claire's wedding planner. "Claire," I said, injecting a note of worry into my voice, "I'm a little concerned about making such big decisions so quickly. Jonathan just died yesterday. Shouldn't we take some time to grieve before changing everything?" Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, Evelyn. I don't want to pressure you. It's just that the life insurance money won't be available for several weeks, and there are some debts from Jonathan's business that need to be paid immediately. He wouldn't want his reputation tarnished by unpaid obligations. Debts from a business that never existed, paid with money stolen from me." The audacity was breathtaking. "How much money are we talking about?" I asked. "About $150,000 in immediate obligations," she said without missing a beat. "The lawyer suggested that a bridge loan from your savings account would be the cleanest solution, to be repaid when the insurance settles. $150,000. Nearly half of my remaining savings, gone in one fell swoop to pay fictional debts for a fictional business. And when the insurance money came through, there would be another excuse, another urgent need, until every penny was gone. I'd like to think about it," I said. "Maybe talk to my own financial advisor." The mask slipped again, just for a second, and I saw something cold and dangerous flash in her eyes. "Evelyn, I don't think that's wise. Jonathan specifically chose Mr. Patterson because he understands our situation. Bringing in outside advisors could complicate things unnecessarily." Translation: outside advisors might ask inconvenient questions about non-existent businesses and forged documents. "Of course," I said, backing down in the way she expected. "You know best. Jonathan always said you were so much smarter about these things than I am." Her smile returned, warm and reassuring and completely fake. "We're family, Evelyn. I promised Jonathan I would take care of you, and that's exactly what I intend to do." As we finished dinner, she walked me to my car, still playing the devoted daughter-in-law. "I'll call Mr. Patterson tonight and set up a meeting for tomorrow morning. We can get all the paperwork started and have this resolved quickly." I nodded and hugged her goodbye, fighting every instinct that screamed at me to run. As I drove home, I could see Detective Martinez's unmarked car following at a discreet distance, and I felt slightly safer knowing I wasn't completely alone in this deception. Back at home, I called Maria immediately. "She wants $150,000 tomorrow morning for fake business debts," I reported, "and she's trying to pressure me into selling the house for a retirement community I never visited." "We've been busy too," Maria said. "Christina Vale is wanted in 3 states for exactly this kind of fraud. We found 2 other families she's destroyed, and we think there may be more. The question is, can you buy us more time without making her suspicious?" "How much time?" "Another week, maybe 2. We need to trace the money trail, gather enough evidence for ironclad charges, and coordinate with other jurisdictions. If she gets spooked and runs, we might never catch her." I thought about Harold Weinstein, about the other families Claire had destroyed, about my son lying cold in his grave while his murderer planned her next move. "I'll give you the time you need," I said. "But Maria, I want her to pay for what she did to Jonathan. I want her to pay for all of it." The next morning, I prepared for what might be the performance of my life. At 65, I had never considered myself much of an actress, but grief and rage were powerful motivators. I dressed carefully in my most conservative outfit, a navy blue dress my late husband had complimented years ago, and applied just enough makeup to look presentable but vulnerable. Claire arrived at my house at exactly 9 a.m., accompanied by a tall, silver-haired man she introduced as Mr. Patterson. He looked like Central Casting's version of a trustworthy lawyer: expensive suit, warm handshake, sympathetic eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. If I hadn't known better, I might have been completely taken in by his performance. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, his voice rich with practiced sympathy, "please accept my condolences. Jonathan spoke of you often, and with such love." The lie slid off his tongue like silk, and I wondered how many grieving families had heard those same words. "Thank you," I replied, gesturing them into my living room. "Can I offer you coffee?" As I served refreshments, I caught Mr. Patterson cataloging my possessions with the same calculating gaze I had learned to recognize in Claire. His eyes lingered on my grandmother's china cabinet, my husband's coin collection, the original artwork we had collected over 30 years of marriage. "Mrs. Brooks," he began, settling into my late husband's favorite armchair with casual familiarity, I know this is a difficult time, but Jonathan was very specific about his wishes for your financial security. He opened his briefcase and withdrew a stack of papers that looked official and intimidating. As Claire explained, there are immediate obligations from Jonathan's business that require attention. The creditors are becoming quite insistent. What kind of business debts? I asked, playing the confused widow. I thought Jonathan's consulting was doing well. Mr. Patterson and Claire exchanged a look that they probably thought was subtle. Consulting businesses have irregular cash flow, he explained smoothly. Jonathan often had to extend credit to clients, and unfortunately, several large accounts defaulted just before his passing. More fiction, delivered with the confidence of truth. According to Jonathan's letter, the private investigator he hired had found no trace of any legitimate business activity, no office leases, no employees, no tax filings, nothing but a carefully constructed shell designed to justify constant requests for money. The immediate shortfall is $150,000, Claire added, her hand finding mine in another of those fake, comforting gestures. But there's also the matter of your long-term security. Mr. Patterson nodded gravely. Mrs. Brooks, I've reviewed your financial situation and I'm concerned. You're living on a fixed income in a house that requires significant maintenance. Property taxes are rising. Utilities are becoming more expensive. And if you needed long-term care, he let the implication hang in the air like a threat. This was their strategy. Create fear about my future, present themselves as the solution, then systematically drain every asset I possessed. Jonathan researched several retirement communities, Claire said, producing a glossy brochure for Sunset Manor. This one in particular caught his attention. It's beautiful, Evelyn. You'd have your own apartment, all meals provided, activities, medical care on site. You'd never have to worry about anything again. The brochure showed smiling elderly people engaged in various activities, but all I could think about was Harold Weinstein and the other victims who had probably seen similar brochures, heard similar promises of security and care. The entry fee seemed substantial, I said, pretending to study the numbers. $350,000 for a standard unit. It's an investment in your peace of mind, Mr. Patterson said. And consider the alternative. If you stay here and something happens to you, if you need assisted care or memory care, the costs could easily exceed $1 million over time. Memory care. They were already laying the groundwork for declaring me incompetent, for taking control of any assets that remained after their initial harvest. I need to think about this, I said, putting the brochure aside. It's all happening so fast. Claire's smile faltered just slightly. Evelyn, I understand this feels overwhelming, but the creditors won't wait. If Jonathan's debts aren't paid within the next few days, they could come after his estate, which means they could come after you. The threat was subtle but clear. Pay now or face legal consequences from fictional creditors for fictional debts. What do you recommend? I asked, letting a note of panic creep into my voice. Mr. Patterson leaned forward, his expression radiating false compassion. The simplest solution would be to liquidate your current assets, your savings, your investment accounts, perhaps take a reverse mortgage on the house to cover the retirement community entry fee. I can have all the paperwork ready by this afternoon. All the paperwork ready. They had been planning this conversation for months, probably years, waiting for Jonathan to die so they could make their final move. I suppose that makes sense, I said slowly. But I'd like to call my bank first, just to understand the process. Of course, Claire said quickly. But remember, banks can be very slow with these kinds of transactions. Mr. Patterson has connections that can expedite everything. Mr. Patterson's connections, probably forged documents and shell companies, designed to make my money disappear permanently. Actually, I said, as if the thought had just occurred to me, I should probably call Jonathan's real lawyer first. You know, the one who handled our wills originally, just to make sure everything is coordinated properly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mr. Patterson and Claire exchanged another look, this one sharp with warning. Mrs. Brooks, Mr. Patterson said carefully, I am Jonathan's lawyer. I've been handling all his affairs for the past 2 years. Oh, I said, blinking in confusion. I'm sorry, I'm getting so mixed up. Grief does terrible things to your memory, doesn't it? Claire patted my hand again, but her touch felt different now, more controlling than comforting. That's exactly why you need people to take care of these details for you, Evelyn. You shouldn't have to worry about complicated legal and financial matters when you're mourning. You're absolutely right, I agreed. I trust you both completely. When do we start? The relief on their faces was almost comical. They thought they had me, the confused, grieving widow ready to hand over her life savings to the people who had murdered her son. But as I signed the preliminary paperwork they produced, I was thinking about Detective Martinez and her team, who were probably at that very moment tracing the money trails and building the case that would destroy these monsters. I was thinking about Jonathan, who had died trying to protect me from this moment. And I was thinking about Harold Weinstein and all the other victims who had never gotten justice. Claire and Mr. Patterson left that afternoon with promises to return the next day with the final paperwork. As soon as their car disappeared down my street, I called Detective Martinez. "They're moving fast," I reported. "They want everything liquidated within 48 hours. "Perfect," Maria replied. "We've identified 5 more victims across 3 states, and the FBI is now involved. Can you stall them for 2 more days?" "I think so. But Maria, they're getting suspicious. I don't think I can keep up this act much longer." "You won't have to. Mrs. Brooks, you've been incredibly brave. In 2 days, this nightmare will be over. 2 more days of pretending to trust my son's killers. 2 more days of letting them think they were about to steal my life's work." But then Claire would learn what happened when someone underestimated a 65-year-old retired teacher who had nothing left to lose. That evening, Detective Martinez visited with news that both vindicated my suspicions and broke my heart further. Her team had been working around the clock, and what they discovered painted an even darker picture than Jonathan's letter had revealed. "Mrs. Brooks," Maria said, settling into my kitchen with a thick file folder. "We've confirmed that Christina Vale has been running this con for at least 12 years. We've found 7 victims across 5 states, and the total theft is over $2 million. $2 million. 7 families destroyed by the woman who had sat in my living room that morning, holding my hand and calling me family." "But there's more," Maria continued, her expression grim. 3 of the adult children who were used in these cons died under suspicious circumstances. Heart attacks, car accidents, drug overdoses, all young, healthy people with no history of the conditions that killed them. My hands clenched into fists on the table. "She's been murdering people for years." "We think so. The problem is proving it. Christina is very sophisticated. She uses different identities, works with a network of accomplices like this fake lawyer, and she's careful to space out her crimes across jurisdictions to avoid detection." Maria opened the file and spread out photographs across my kitchen table. Driver's licenses, marriage certificates, death certificates, the paper trail of destroyed lives. Christina Vale had been Rebecca Chen in Sacramento, Michelle Rodriguez in Phoenix, Sarah Williams in Denver. Always the grieving widow, always the devoted daughter-in-law, always the last person anyone would suspect. Harold Weinstein's son David died in a car accident, Maria explained, pointing to a police report. Single vehicle crash on a clear day, no witnesses. David had just threatened to expose Christina's activities to his father, like Jonathan did, I whispered. Exactly. Margaret Foster's daughter Lisa died of a drug overdose, even though Lisa had been clean for 3 years and was about to reveal Christina's scheme to her mother. William Chen's son Michael had a heart attack at 38, the same age as several of Christina's other victims. The photographs of the dead children looked so young, so full of life in their driver's license photos. Sons and daughters who had tried to protect their parents and paid with their lives. "What about the money?" I asked. "Where does it all go?" "Offshore accounts, cryptocurrency, real estate purchases under shell companies. Christina has perfected the art of making money disappear. But Mrs. Brooks, this is where you can help us catch her." Maria pulled out a small device that looked like a pen. "This is a recording device. Tomorrow when she comes back for the final paperwork, we need you to get her talking about the other victims. If we can get her to admit to even one of the previous schemes, we'll have the evidence we need to connect her to all of them." "What do you want me to say?" "Act confused about the process. Ask questions about how she's done this before, whether other families have faced similar situations. Make her think you're just a worried old lady seeking reassurance." I laughed bitterly. That's exactly what she thinks I am. A helpless old woman too stupid to see what's happening to her. "Use that," Maria advised. "Let her underestimate you. Predators like Christina are arrogant. They believe their own superiority so completely that they make mistakes." That night, I lay awake planning what I would say, how I would draw Christina into revealing her crimes. But I also found myself thinking about Jonathan's last months, trying to reconcile the loving son I remembered with the cold stranger he had appeared to become. Now I understood the weight he had been carrying, the impossible choice between protecting me and protecting himself. Every time he had asked for money, he must have died a little inside. Every family gathering where he seemed distant, every birthday he forgot, or holiday he skipped, Christina had been pulling his strings, forcing him to hurt me to serve her agenda. But he had fought back in the end. The private investigator, the letter, the evidence he had gathered. My son had died, trying to save me from the monster he had unwittingly brought into our lives. The next morning, I was ready. I dressed in my most conservative outfit again, practiced looking confused and helpless in the mirror, and checked the recording device Detective Martinez had given me. At exactly 10 a.m., Christina arrived with Mr. Patterson and a briefcase full of what I knew were fraudulent documents. "Evelyn," Christina said, embracing me with that same fake warmth, "are you ready to take this important step toward your security?" "I think so," I replied, letting uncertainty color my voice. "I just have a few questions that kept me awake last night." They settled into my living room like vultures preparing to feast. Mr. Patterson opened his briefcase with theatrical precision, while Christina arranged her features into an expression of patient concern. "What's troubling you, dear?" Christina asked. "It's just that this all seems so complicated," I said. "Have you helped other families go through this kind of transition? I'd feel better knowing that others have successfully navigated similar situations." Christina's eyes lit up with what I now recognized as predatory satisfaction. She thought I was asking for testimonials, looking for reassurance that their plan would work. "Oh, yes," she said smoothly. "Mr. Patterson and I have guided several families through these transitions. It's always difficult at first, but the peace of mind that comes afterward is worth every moment of temporary uncertainty. Really, can you tell me about them? I'd love to hear some success stories." Mr. Patterson started to speak, but Christina held up a hand to stop him. "Well, there was Harold Weinstein in Sacramento. His situation was remarkably similar to yours. A widower living alone in a house too big for him, worried about his financial future after his son David passed away." My heart pounded, but I kept my expression neutral. She was confessing to the Harold Weinstein case, exactly what Detective Martinez needed. "What happened to his son?" I asked innocently. "Car accident, very sudden. Harold was devastated, of course, but David had left instructions very similar to Jonathan's. He wanted his father to be secure and comfortable in his golden years. Instructions that David had never written, plans that existed only in Christina's criminal imagination. And Harold followed his son's advice? Absolutely. We helped him liquidate his assets and move to a beautiful retirement community in Napa Valley. He's been there for 3 years now, and tells me regularly how grateful he is that David was so thoughtful about his future." Another lie. According to Detective Martinez's research, Harold Weinstein had died 6 months after Christina stole his money, alone and penniless in a state-run nursing home. "It sounds wonderful," I said. "Were there others?" Christina launched into sanitized versions of Margaret Foster and William Chen's stories, each time presenting herself as the caring daughter-in-law who had helped grieving parents navigate their financial difficulties after tragic losses. With each name she mentioned, with each detail she provided, the recording device captured evidence that would connect her to years of theft and murder. She was so confident in her manipulation of me that she never considered the possibility that I might be gathering evidence against her. "You see, Evelyn," she concluded, "we've perfected this process. You won't have to worry about anything ever again." "That's such a relief," I said, and for the first time in days, I was telling the complete truth. The final paperwork session was scheduled for Friday afternoon, exactly 1 week after Jonathan's funeral. Christina and Mr. Patterson arrived with a notary public, a heavy-set woman named Mrs. Kim, who seemed nervous and avoided eye contact. I suspected she was either another accomplice or an innocent party who had no idea she was witnessing the final stage of an elaborate fraud. "Today's the day, Evelyn," Christina said, her smile bright with anticipation. "By this evening, all your financial worries will be behind you." They had prepared an impressive array of documents, bank transfer authorizations, property deeds, investment liquidation forms, and the papers for Sunset Manor. Everything designed to strip me of every asset I possessed and leave me completely dependent on Christina's generosity. I have to admit, I said, accepting the pen Mr. Patterson offered, I'm still a little nervous about such a big change. That's completely natural, Christina assured me. But remember, this is what Jonathan wanted for you. He spent months planning every detail to ensure your security. Months planning my financial destruction, more likely. But I nodded and began signing papers, each signature bringing Christina closer to her ultimate goal. Mrs. Brooks, Mrs. Kim said suddenly, I need to ask you a few questions for legal purposes. Are you signing these documents of your own free will, without coercion or undue influence? Of course, I replied. And do you understand the financial implications of these transfers? I paused, as if considering the question carefully. I'm trusting my family to guide me through this process. They understand these matters much better than I do. Mrs. Kim looked uncomfortable, but she continued with her notarization duties. I wondered if she had been asking these same questions to Harold Weinstein and the other victims, if some part of her suspected that she was witnessing financial elder abuse. As I signed the final document, the one that would transfer my house to a shell company controlled by Christina, my doorbell rang. Are you expecting someone? Christina asked, her voice sharp with sudden tension. No, I said, looking genuinely confused. Maybe it's a neighbor checking on me. I walked to the front door and opened it to find Detective Martinez standing on my porch with 2 FBI agents and a warrant for Christina Vale's arrest. Mrs. Brooks, Maria said loudly enough for everyone in the living room to hear, we're here about your son's death and the financial crimes that have been committed against you. The chaos that erupted behind me was exactly what I had hoped for. Christina's mask finally slipped completely as she realized that her carefully constructed world was collapsing. Mr. Patterson grabbed his briefcase and headed for the back door, while Mrs. Kim sat frozen in her chair, understanding too late what she had been witnessing. You lying old bitch, Christina screamed at me, her cultured facade completely gone. You planned this. You've been working with them. Just like you planned to steal everything I owned, I replied, turning to face her with calm dignity. Just like you planned to murder my son. The FBI agents moved quickly to secure the scene. Agent Sarah Chen, a coincidence of names that wasn't lost on me, arrested Christina, while Agent Morrison pursued Mr. Patterson, catching him as he tried to escape through my backyard. Christina Vale, Agent Chen said, reading from her warrant. You're under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit murder. You have the right to remain silent. As the Miranda rights were read, Christina continued screaming accusations at me, her composure completely shattered. This was the real woman who had destroyed so many families, not the caring daughter-in-law she had pretended to be, but a vicious predator whose only concern was her own profit. We found the offshore accounts, Detective Martinez told me quietly as the FBI processed the crime scene. Over $3 million in assets stolen from 8 families. She's been doing this for 15 years, Mrs. Brooks. You just helped us stop a serial killer. Mrs. Kim, it turned out, was indeed an innocent party, a legitimate notary who had been hired through a temp agency and had no idea she was facilitating fraud. She was released after providing a statement, but I could see the trauma in her eyes as she realized how close she had come to being an accessory to multiple felonies. What happens now? I asked Maria, as the suspects were loaded into police cars. Now we build the murder cases, she replied. We have Christina's confessions from your recording about the previous victims. Combined with the forensic evidence our teams have been gathering, we should be able to prove that she killed Jonathan and at least 3 other people. How did she do it? How did she give Jonathan a heart attack? Digitalis, Maria explained. It's a heart medication that's undetectable in standard autopsies unless you're specifically looking for it. Christina had access to it through one of her previous victims, an elderly man whose wife had a heart condition. She's been using it as her murder weapon for years. Digitalis, a poison derived from foxglove flowers, appropriate for someone whose beauty concealed such deadly intentions. As the last police car pulled away from my house, I stood in my living room surrounded by the scattered paperwork of Christina's final con. Documents that would have left me homeless and penniless, at the mercy of a woman who had already killed my son. But instead of being her 8th victim, I had become the instrument of her downfall. 3 months later, I sat in a federal courthouse watching Christina Vale face the consequences of 15 years of predatory behavior. She had been denied bail after investigators found evidence that she was planning to flee the country with money stolen from previous victims. The woman who had once seemed so composed and elegant now looked haggard and desperate, her true nature finally exposed for the world to see. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. My recordings had provided the breakthrough that connected Christina to multiple victims across several states. The FBI had traced money movements through shell companies and offshore accounts, documenting a pattern of financial predation that spanned more than a decade. But it was the murder evidence that truly sealed her fate. The defendant used digitalis, a cardiac glycoside, to induce fatal heart arrhythmias in at least 4 victims, prosecutor Amanda Walsh explained to the jury. She obtained this poison from the prescription medication of William Chen's deceased wife, using it to murder Mr. Chen's son Michael when he threatened to expose her fraud. The forensic evidence was damning. Exhumation of the victims' bodies had revealed traces of digitalis in tissue samples, and Christina's fingerprints were found on prescription bottles belonging to the deceased family members. She had been collecting medications from her elderly victims for years, building an arsenal of weapons disguised as prescription drugs. Jonathan Brooks, the prosecutor continued, was murdered because he hired a private investigator and gathered evidence of the defendant's crimes. On the day he died, security cameras at a nearby coffee shop captured the defendant meeting with Mr. Brooks, where she likely administered the fatal dose. I had insisted on seeing that security footage, despite Detective Martinez's concerns about my emotional well-being. Watching my son meet with his killer for the last time was heartbreaking, but it also provided closure. Jonathan looked frightened in the video, but determined. He had been trying to save me, even knowing it would cost him his life. During Christina's testimony in her own defense, she finally revealed the full scope of her crimes. Desperate to avoid the death penalty, she confessed to murders and thefts that investigators hadn't even discovered yet. "I never meant for anyone to die," she claimed, tears streaming down her face in a final performance. "It was just supposed to be about the money. But they threatened to expose me, and I panicked." 8 families, 12 victims, over $4 million in stolen assets. The numbers were staggering, but they didn't capture the true cost of Christina's crimes: the destroyed relationships, the shattered trust, the survivors left to question everything they thought they knew about the people they loved. Harold Weinstein's daughter testified via video link from Sacramento, describing how her father had died believing his son David had stopped loving him. Margaret Foster's surviving children spoke about their mother's final years, spent in poverty and confusion after Christina stole her retirement savings. "She didn't just take our money," Harold's daughter said through tears. "She took our family's story and turned it into a lie. My father died thinking his son was selfish and ungrateful, never knowing that David died trying to protect him. When it was my turn to testify, I looked directly at Christina as I spoke. She had the audacity to meet my eyes, perhaps hoping to find some trace of the confused old woman she had thought she was manipulating. Christina Vale destroyed my relationship with my son," I told the jury. "She turned the last 2 years of Jonathan's life into a nightmare of fear and guilt. She made him lie to me, hurt me, distance himself from me, all while planning to murder him and steal everything I had worked for my entire life. But she made one crucial mistake," I continued. "She underestimated a 65-year-old retired teacher who still had some fight left in her." The trial lasted 6 weeks. Christina was convicted on 43 counts, including 8 murders, multiple counts of fraud, money laundering, and elder abuse. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 200 years to be served consecutively. Mr. Patterson, whose real name was Thomas Bradley, received 25 years for his role in the conspiracy. The FBI discovered that he had been working with Christina for over a decade, providing legal cover for her schemes and helping to create the shell companies that hid her stolen assets. As Christina was led away in handcuffs, she looked at me one final time. The woman who had once called me family, who had held my hand and promised to take care of me, now stared at me with pure hatred. "You think you've won," she said quietly, her voice carrying across the courtroom. "But you're still just a lonely old woman with nothing left." I stood up and smiled at her. "I have something you'll never understand, Christina. I have the truth, and I have justice for my son." She was wrong about something else, too. I wasn't alone anymore. 6 months after Christina's conviction, I received an unexpected phone call that would change my life in ways I never anticipated. Detective Martinez had given my contact information to Harold Weinstein's daughter, Susan, who had reached out to me after reading about the trial in the newspaper. "Mrs. Brooks," Susan said during our first conversation, "I know this might sound strange, but I feel like you're the only person who truly understands what our families went through." She was right. The 8 families Christina had destroyed shared a unique bond. We were the survivors of a predator who had weaponized trust and love against us. Over the following weeks, Susan and I began connecting with other survivors from across the country. Margaret Foster's son Robert drove down from Denver to meet me in person. William Chen's daughter Amy flew in from Phoenix. One by one, we found each other, drawn together by shared trauma, but united in our determination to heal and honor our murdered family members. "She stole more than money," Robert said during one of our gatherings at my house. "She stole our memories. Every family dinner, every holiday, every conversation with our loved ones before they died. It's all contaminated now by what we know she was doing." But together, we began the process of reclaiming those memories. Amy shared stories about her brother Michael's kindness, how he had volunteered at animal shelters and donated anonymously to children's charities. Susan told us about David's dream of becoming a teacher, how he had planned to use his inheritance to fund scholarships for underprivileged students. Jonathan was going to propose to someone else, I revealed during one of our sessions. Before Christina, I found her picture in his college things, a sweet girl named Rachel who worked at the library. If Christina hadn't targeted him, he might have had a completely different life. We created a support group that we called Families of Fraud Victims, and it grew beyond just Christina's victims. Other families who had experienced similar crimes found us through news coverage and social media. We began advocating for stronger laws to protect elderly people from financial predators and working with law enforcement agencies to identify warning signs of these elaborate cons. The FBI asked me to participate in a training program, teaching agents how to recognize the patterns of long-term financial manipulation. It was both empowering and heartbreaking to share my story, knowing that each audience might include someone who could prevent another family from suffering what we had endured. "The key insight from your case," Agent Chen told me after one training session, "is that these predators often work for years to isolate their victims from legitimate support systems. They create dependency while appearing to provide care." I also worked with financial institutions to develop better protocols for detecting unusual account activity that might indicate elder abuse. Several banks adopted new policies requiring additional verification for large transfers from elderly customers, potentially saving countless families from financial devastation. The recovered assets from Christina's crimes, over $3 million in total, were distributed among her victims' families through a complex restitution process. While money could never repair the emotional damage she had caused, it did provide some measure of practical relief for the families she had left in financial ruin. My share of the recovered funds, combined with the assets I had protected by helping to expose Christina, allowed me to establish the Jonathan Brooks Memorial Scholarship at my old school district. Each year, it provides full college funding for 3 students who have overcome significant family trauma, kids who, like Jonathan, deserved a chance to build better lives despite the circumstances they couldn't control. But perhaps the most healing experience came from an unexpected source. Rachel Morrison, the library worker Jonathan had been planning to propose to 15 years ago, contacted me after reading about the trial. "Mrs. Brooks," she said when she called, "I just wanted you to know that Jonathan was a good man. What happened to him, what that woman forced him to do, that wasn't who he really was." Rachel had married someone else and built a wonderful life, but she remembered Jonathan fondly. She told me stories about his sense of humor, his kindness to library patrons, his excitement about the future they had been planning together before Christina entered his life. "He talked about you all the time," Rachel revealed. "He was so proud of your teaching career, so grateful for everything you had sacrificed to give him opportunities. The Jonathan I knew would never have hurt you willingly." Those words meant more to me than any financial restitution ever could. They gave me back my son, not the frightened, controlled man Christina had turned him into, but the loving, hopeful person he had been before his life was hijacked by a predator. 2 years after Christina's conviction, I stood in my kitchen preparing Sunday dinner for what had become my chosen family. the group of survivors who had found healing together in the aftermath of unimaginable betrayal. Susan was bringing her famous apple pie, Robert was contributing his mother's green bean casserole recipe, and Amy was flying in from Phoenix with homemade tamales that her brother Michael had loved. The house that Christina had tried to steal from me was now filled with laughter and genuine love, the kind of warmth she had never been capable of providing, despite all her expert manipulation. We gathered monthly, sometimes to cry together over our losses, but increasingly to celebrate the lives we were rebuilding from the wreckage of her crimes. "You know," Susan said as we set the table with my grandmother's china, plates that would have been sold to fund Christina's greed if we hadn't stopped her, "I never thought I'd be grateful for surviving something so terrible. But I can't imagine my life without all of you now." She was right. Christina had intended to isolate each of us, to leave us alone and vulnerable after she finished destroying our families. Instead, her crimes had connected us in ways that transcended geography and background. We had become proof that evil could be overcome, that predators could be stopped, and that survivors could find strength in unity. Detective Martinez, who had become a close friend over the past 2 years, joined us for dinner whenever her schedule allowed. Today she brought news about Christina's latest appeals, all of which had been rejected by higher courts. "She'll never see freedom again," Maria assured us. "And more importantly, she'll never hurt another family. The FBI has used the evidence from her case to identify and arrest 3 other members of her network. We've prevented at least a dozen potential crimes." The ripple effects of our victory continued to expand. The legislation we had advocated for, the Family Financial Protection Act, had passed in 4 states and was under consideration in 6 others. The law required additional oversight for large financial transactions involving elderly individuals and created harsher penalties for those who exploited vulnerable adults. "Mrs. Brooks," Amy said as we shared dessert, "I have news that I think will make you happy. I'm getting married next month, and I'd like you to be there. You've become the family I lost when my brother died." I accepted immediately, honored to be included in this joyful milestone. Over the past 2 years, I had attended graduations, celebrations, and family gatherings for all of my survivor family members. We had created new traditions, new memories that weren't tainted by Christina's manipulation. After everyone left that evening, I sat in my living room looking at photographs from our gatherings. 2 years ago, I had been a grieving mother who thought she had lost everything: her son, her money, her trust in other people. I had been exactly what Christina expected, a broken old woman with no fight left. But she had been wrong about my capacity for resilience, just as she had been wrong about everything else that mattered. I was not the helpless victim she thought she was manipulating. I was a retired teacher who had spent 30 years dealing with challenging situations and difficult people. I was a mother who would do anything to protect her child, even after his death. I was a woman who understood that sometimes the greatest strength comes from appearing weak until the moment you strike back. The envelope Christina had given me at Jonathan's funeral, the one containing his confession and evidence of her crimes, sat framed on my mantel now, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof that love could triumph over evil, that truth could overcome deception, and that even in his darkest moments, my son had been working to save me. "Do you want to know the truth?" Christina had asked me that day, thinking she was delivering a final blow to a broken woman. The truth was that her son had never stopped loving me. The truth was that she had underestimated the determination of a mother seeking justice. The truth was that she had created the very evidence that would destroy her. But the most important truth was this: she had failed. As I prepared for bed, I reflected on how much my life had changed since that terrible day at the funeral home. I was 67 now, still living independently in the house she had tried to steal, still managing my own finances, still connected to a community of people who cared about each other genuinely, rather than strategically. The Jonathan Brooks Memorial Scholarship had provided college funding for 6 students so far, with 3 more recipients selected for the upcoming academic year. These young people carried my son's name forward in ways that honored his true character rather than the lies Christina had forced him to live. Tomorrow, I would drive to the cemetery to visit Jonathan's grave. I made this trip every Sunday, not to mourn what was lost, but to report on what had been saved. I would tell him about Susan's new granddaughter, about Robert's promotion at work, about Amy's upcoming wedding. I would update him on the scholarship recipients and their achievements. and I would remind him that his sacrifice had not been in vain. She thought she could destroy us, I would tell him, as I had every week for 2 years, but she only made us stronger. Before turning off the lights, I checked my email one final time. There was a message from a woman in Seattle whose elderly father had narrowly avoided a scam similar to Christina's, thanks to the warning signs published by our advocacy group. Another family saved, another predator thwarted. The truth Christina had tried to use as a weapon against me had become a shield protecting others. Every family that avoided her fate was a victory for Jonathan's memory, proof that his death had meaning beyond the tragedy of how it occurred. At 67, I had learned that it's never too late to fight back, never too late to seek justice, and never too late to build new forms of love from the ashes of betrayal. Christina Vale had thought she was giving me an ending that day at the funeral. Instead, she had given me a beginning. And if you followed this story to its conclusion, if you understand that family predators can be stopped and that survivors can find healing together, then please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Knowing that people around the world are listening to these stories of resilience gives hope to other survivors who might be facing their own battles against deception and abuse. Remember, you are stronger than you know, braver than you believe, and never as alone as predators want you to feel. The truth will always find a way to shine through the darkness, and justice delayed is not justice denied. My name is Evelyn Brooks. I'm 67 years old and I live in Portland, Oregon. This is my story of how the truth set me free.